You're listening to Back Pew Convos.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Sal. And this is the podcast God wants you to listen to.
So if you want to remain in God's will, have a sit down.
Grab a beverage of your choice.
And have a listen.
You're welcome.
Here we are.
Here we are again.
Here we are.
Let's give it a go. Let's give it a try.
Give it the old college try.
Yeah, we got us some new microphones. Got us a new setup, new studio here.
How silky smooth does my voice sound right
Sounds
now?
great.
Like butter.
So, this is episode number 2.
Tis.
All right, this is our deconstruction episode.
What's that mean to you?
That's a good question, actually. I think it's something that doesn't have a static definition. I think it means something different for everybody, which is, I think why it's a good idea that I think that we lay that out right off the bat here.
Right.
To me, it's simply, I've always viewed faith as sort of a building, basically. I guess maybe it was shaped around the verses, building on the cornerstone or building on the shifting sands or whatever. So I've always kind of had that view of faith. And so when I think of deconstruction, I simply just think of tearing it down, or not even tearing it down, but maybe it's falling down, or, that structure that was your faith is somehow coming apart.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Makes sense to me. I guess, for me, when I think about just the word deconstruction, I think about literally just taking something apart.
Right.
Taking pieces away from something. There's, I relate it to food, kind of. You can have a deconstructed dish where all the pieces, all the ingredients are there, but they're not put together. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I guess, just taking the pieces out, examining them, seeing where they're supposed to, seeing what fits, what doesn't. Your analogy is way better than mine.
But I don't know about that, but I just always work, construction and deconstruction in my mind. It's
right.
Plus, like I said, I've always kind of viewed faith in that through those lenses anyway. So it just makes sense to me that way, to frame it that way. But
I really think that your analogy, like I said, your analogy makes way more sense. But I think that I've always thought of it more in terms of a puzzle,
right,
or a song that has if you finding out that there's an off note, a wrong chord,
right,
that brings a dissonance to the song that you're that doesn't quite fit there.
So instead of taking the song as a whole, you're just examining the notes that make the song.
Right.
Yeah.
That was what it seemed like to me. It seemed like I had envisioned this perfect song in my head, but then when I actually sat down and listened to it, there was some wrong chords there.
Right.
That needed to be re-recorded. Maybe. I don't know. That's probably not. Again, your house analogy is way more biblical and makes way more sense.
What can I say? I'm a genius. Our listeners are going to come to expect that out of us.
Yeah, I guess.
Now, we thought that a good introduction to the podcast and a good way to talk about deconstruction is just simply to tell our own stories, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what we wanted to do with this episode, is go through our deconstruction journey. And then the next episode, we will attack our reconstruction. So,
right.
For me, I guess I'll go ahead and start. For me, I guess I want to just start and briefly touch my childhood, just because I think it gives everybody a kind of a good frame of mind to know where I started from.
Yeah.
I was born and raised in in church So we attended a Southern Baptist church, and we were every Sunday church goers. You know, I don't know if this is a every single Southern Baptist thing or if it was just our church, but they used to hand out little Sunday school perfect attendance pins, and I had a drawer full of them. Like, we were there every Sunday.
Yeah.
But I say that to say, like, we also weren't an overly religious family. I don't ever remember talking about Jesus or God outside of the church walls. Like, that just wasn't a topic that came up at my house. And I don't say that in a bad way, because we were taught by my parents the values, you know, Christ-like living, just without the names and formality attached to it.
Right.
So that's kind of like my formal church background. I was saved at Vacation Bible School at this church at about, I don't remember, I think I was 9 or 10, that age. But that was like one of about 7.2 billion times that I said the sinner's prayer.
Yeah.
That was just the first of many.
Right.
And that's, you know, another kind of key piece to framing my childhood and what kind of frame of mind I was coming into adulthood was I had that sinner's prayer anxiety. You know, a lot of people have rapture anxiety, and that wasn't for me. Mine was, am I really saved? You know, so I said the sinner's prayer like who knows how many times. Every single year at Center Break. I don't know if there's anybody else listening to this that's ever been a Center Break or what. You know, that was a huge part of my childhood. Is for those of you who don't know, it's where we took spring break, youth group, went down to Panama City Beach, Florida, and basically went to church camp there for the week of spring break. And I got saved every single week of Center Break for my entire youth group experience.
Right.
So, you know, that was, I feel like that's kind of key. And then, you know, the last key point, I guess, for me, to kind of frame things for the audience is that, I was raised to question things. And I've always been inquisitive, right? So I can distinctly remember sitting in Sunday school classes, asking the hard questions, having, you know, the instances where the teacher didn't have answers. I had to go get the pastor and come and talk to the class and be like, I'm at a loss for words. Can you help me out here? Basically, I don't get paid enough for this. Just as an example, and this has been, I don't know how old I was. I was surely before 6th grade, like maybe 5th grade ish. And I still can remember it. Which that was a long time ago for those of you who don't know. I'm in my mid-30s now, so that's been a minute. But we were having a discussion about the way that the teacher framed it was that the Jewish people were the chosen people. They were special. And like the way that it was framed just didn't sit right with me, because I was like, so what you're saying is that God is racist, basically. Like he's pick out a special race of people that he's exalted above everybody. That just doesn't sit right with me. And so we had a big discussion about this. Had to go get the pastor to come in and talk about, like, even from that early of an age, those were the kind of things that, like, I hear what you're saying and I know what the Bible says, but something just isn't clicking with me. It just doesn't seem right to me, you know? So, which I feel like I had to point that out, because obviously it kind of makes sense where I'm going with that, like why I was maybe susceptible to the deconstruction journey, you know? But really, I mean, just for like a quick background, I know I went through that pretty fast, but I'm trying to. I don't want to like tell my life story here, you know, but I just wanted to give a little quick overview and background of where I'm coming from. So that's kind of my childhood summed up.
Mine was different from that, for sure. I was, you know, I've always been in church. There's never been a time whenever I wasn't I mean, I don't even remember the specific point in time when I got saved, quote unquote. I mean, I know that there must have been a time when I initially said the words, you know, but I don't remember when that was.
Right.
I've always been in church. I've always believed in God. I never really questioned my salvation much. But also unlike you, I wasn't like a kid that asked a lot of questions. I was always kind of, I guess I just had so much faith and trust in the people around me that I was like, oh, if that's what you say it is, that's what it is. That's
Right.
cool. Like, I trust you. I believe you. And I believed it to the point of like a level of certainty that now looking back on it, I'm like, you were really certain for someone who never studied anything for yourself ever.
Right.
Like, you would think that with the amount of certainty and the amount of like hard-headed, like, I know that I'm right about this, like, you would think it was something that I would have studied myself and knew for myself, but that was not the case.
Right. Well, I don't think that you're alone in that. I mean, I know a ton of people, especially, in recent history with the whole COVID thing, we had a lot of people who didn't really go to medical school, but were definitely medical experts. So.
Yeah, for sure. But I was always just kind of like a rule follower. And like, we grew up Pentecostal. And so there was a heavy emphasis on the demonstration of the gifts of the Spirit, lots of speaking in tongues, lots of shouting, which isn't yelling. In case anyone's not familiar with Pentecostalism, that shouting is not yelling. It's more akin to like a dancing, or like, for us it was kind of like a spiritual warfare type thing, right? Like, you had stuff on you that you gathered throughout the week that you needed to shake off of you. So there was a lot of demonstration of the spirits. The worship was very emotionally driven, very demonstrative. There was a fair amount of fire and brimstone preaching, but for me, unlike you, it wasn't as much like, I don't remember saying the sinner's prayer a bajillion times, but I do remember us having lots of altar calls about, like, if Jesus came back tonight, are you ready?
Right.
Are you ready? Are you ready?
Are you ready for this? Are you hanging on the edge of your seat?
So for me, most of my, I didn't really have a whole lot of, like, being unsure of my salvation, but I had a lot of being unsure about my being an overcomer. Right.
Yeah.
Because I don't know why else we would be getting altar calls unless there was something other than being saved that was required to make it in the rapture.
Right.
So there's the scriptures, if you're lukewarm, he'll spew you out of his mouth. You got to be on fire, right? So you can't just be saved. There's
Right.
something additional, some sort of higher level that you need to reach. And if you're not doing that, then you risk being left here.
Right.
And then you have to become a martyr, get your head chopped off for not taking the mark, So for me, there was a lot of anxiety around missing the rapture, more so than just not being saved in general. And so there was definitely the hellfire preaching and stuff like that. But there was a lot of rapture stuff for me too that caused anxiety.
Right.
That I had to deal with later on.
And I think that the fear, that same fear, even though we were kind of different in that, like, for you it was more the rapture, for me, am I really saved? Like, I think the fear comes from the same place, though. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, because as you were describing it, like, there has to be something more. You can't be lukewarm. You have to be on fire. I feel like that was sort of the root of why I said the sinner's prayer 9 million times, is because going, like I said, we didn't really talk about Jesus or God that much outside the four walls of the church. So it was like, and I only went to church on Sunday mornings. Like, we weren't going multiple times a week. So it wasn't a huge part of my life, And so then when I would, like, be immersed in it for like a week long youth camp, I'm like, oh, I'm not doing enough. I'm lukewarm, even though
Right.
like, really, I was living like what I was taught to live. I mean, I was a good kid, but like, I wasn't on fire. I wasn't doing the extra. I wasn't going that extra step. And so, like, that was kind of the root of where that anxiety came from for me too. So I think that's interesting, just hearing yours, how we've got different fears rooted in the same fear, I guess.
It's the same, I think. And I could say the same thing about mine. It's like, even though I identified mine more as being like a fear of the rapture, missing the rapture, like, looking back on it, I think that with that comes a fear of hell also.
Right.
It's like, what if I did take the mark? Like, am I, you know what I mean? That, that I'm going to the lake of fire, right? So, like, there definitely is. I really think that hell and the rapture are two sides of the same coin in one sense. Like, they're both fear driven things, you know?
Right.
And so, yeah, I guess just to maybe wrap up the whatever info that's necessary before I actually get into my deconstruction, I would say I didn't study a lot. I've already said that. I didn't really study a lot on my own. And that set me up for failure, I feel like.
Right.
It set me up for a fall. So, I guess that's it. I guess that's good enough to start.
I mean, and that's kind of a good, another good point to make. I think that will show how our stories kind of are different but the same, you know, because, again, I was the opposite of that, but yet we still are sitting here at this table sort of in the same, telling the same story, you know what I'm saying? So, yeah, I mean, I guess moving on for me, like my actually deconstruction story starts, I guess I would say, in 2009. So that's when I just graduated college. I got married that year, so we're talking fall of 2009, and I wasn't attending church. Like, I'd kind of become not like I didn't doubt or anything. I just became distant. Like, when I was at college, I just didn't go. And then, you know, like, once you don't go for so long, it just is no longer a part of your life. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Yeah.
So, like, at that point, I guess at that point in my life, I just didn't go anymore. It, you know, I wasn't a non-believer. I just wasn't living the life, you know.
Right.
But, you know, Kelly was, my wife was, and so she was attending, and so, you know, I started going with her to church.
Yeah.
And the church that, you know, that we started attending, it was the church that you were going to, which was, you know, you'd said it was a Pentecostal church. It was Christ Gospel was the denomination. Yep. And so it really hooked me in because, you know, one of the things about, I think most, I don't want to like generalize, but I think most Pentecostal style churches, is that they don't necessarily shy away from questions, like the hard questions. So, and that's what really hooked me in. It's like I had all those questions as a young kid, things that didn't really make sense. And I was basically told to just don't ask those questions. Like, you know, we don't talk about that, those kind of things, you know. So that just kind of didn't sit right with me. But like when we started going here and I started asking these hard questions, like, oh, we've got an answer. Somebody else has already thought of this and here's the answer. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So like that was part of what really drew me in. And so that hooked me in. And from there I took off, really. I mean, I was, I think most evangelical churches are very Bible centric. And so, you know, this church that we were attending is no different. And so I really can't say really enough times got into studying the Bible. Like that was a huge thing for me. You know, I was carrying my Bible around with me to work. I was, you know, reading every break, every lunch break. Like I was just reading. And I know, like, I just started in Genesis 1 and read all the way through to Revelation. Once I ended Revelation, I turned it back to Genesis 1:1, started all over again, you know? Yeah. Like that was a big deal for me, reading. Like I wanted to soak in all of that knowledge. And, you know, aside from that, you know, we were also kind of becoming, as my membership, I guess I would say membership in the church grew, like my place in the church, finding footing, you know, we started leading the youth. So we did that for several years as well. I don't even remember how many years we did it, but it was a while. Like, I know it was at least 3 or 4, I feel like. So, yeah. But that's sort of like, I guess the bridge, that's where my story kind of started. I guess to kind of move more into the deconstruction side of it, there is a quote, I think it's a Mark Twain quote, and I'm not going to get it exact here, but the gist of the quote says that no book has created as many atheists as the Bible. And that was sort of my experience, but not to that extreme. And so what I mean by that is I was so heavy in the Bible, and studying it and wanting to know it and trying to learn the Hebrew and, reading it through. Well, if you ever study it that in depth, you sort of notice that maybe some things aren't as they appear. Mm-hmm. And so I guess that's where things started. That's where the first stone fell out of the construction of my faith, so to speak, is,
right.
I was really just starting to notice things when I was reading that wasn't adding up to at least the way I was taught to understand it.
Right.
And then, so let's just say that's point number one. And then point number two for me was at the same time I was really starting to have some moral questions about hell.
Yep.
At the time I wasn't a father, but I had a good father and I had good grandparents and, I understood what a good father looked like.
Yeah.
And so I had a hard time calling, and looking at God as a good father whenever I could point to fathers here on earth that I felt like were possibly a better example of a good father, So those thoughts start creeping in and you just sort of push them down, right? You're like, we can't think like that. You can't think like that. And then I can vividly remember coming home from work one day. It's the silliest story, but it's a very important one for me. I come home from work, the TV's on, and it's an episode of Dr. Phil. Mm-hmm. And in the episode, the story was interviewing a father, and apparently, as I sat and watched it, the daughter of the family was starting to date a older, troubled boy.
Right.
And the family was like, no, we can't have this. I don't think she was 13 years old or something. You're too young. This kid's trouble. We can't have this. Mm-hmm. And, just to make a long story short, eventually the kid convinced the girl that the only way they could be together is if they killed her family and ran off together.
Yeah.
And so they attacked her younger brother, her mom, her dad, and ran away together.
Yeah.
The brother died. The mom died, but somehow the dad survived. He, if I'm remembering correctly, he crawled over to the neighbor's house, called the police, and that's. But I remember that in that episode, he said that he still went to prison and visited her all the time, and he was asked, how can you do that? He killed she killed your son and your wife. Mm-hmm. How can you still have a relationship with her?
Right. And
his response was, "But she's my daughter."
Yeah.
And I was like that shook me because at the time I'm having all these questions.
Yeah.
And it's if this guy is a flawed human being and that's the level of forgiveness that he can go, that's how much he loves his daughter, then how much more would God love his sons and daughters? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So for me, things really kind of fast tracked from that point. As far as this is just really not making a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess to kind of pick up from my story, how I started deconstructing. Well, let me back up, I guess, a little bit. So there was a point in time when I started to kind of latch on more to the teachings, I think most people are like this, but I was for sure like this. Whenever you're a kid, I didn't do hardly any studying for myself. I personally wasn't very inquisitive and asked a lot of questions. But there was a point in time in which I did realize that there is this thing, because what I grew up with was kind of this idea of science and the Bible being opposed to each other, And so I did have these few questions that I feel like the Christ Gospel teachings did help kind of reconcile. And so in my teenage years, I did sort of latch on to those things, but I still didn't study a lot for myself. But there was this revival that we had, and one of the preacher, the pastor that was visiting, that was doing the revival, that's preaching at the revival that we were having at church, he came up to me and he said, it's time for you to stop riding off your parents' coattails. I think that's what he said.
Right.
I don't know if that's exactly how he put it or not.
That was a couple years ago.
Yeah. That was, I mean, that was probably at least 10 years ago. I don't remember exactly when, but that was probably at least a decade ago. It may have been more than that.
Right.
But yeah, he said that, and I was offended. I was pretty offended when he said that, because I was like, you don't know what you're talking about, dude. Like, I know what I believe.
Yeah.
I know. Like, this is, and there was also I had a lot of pride because I had found these teachings that I felt like answered a lot of those big questions that people have, right, that lead people to atheism. I was like, I got it, guys. Yeah. I got it figured out. Right. There was a lot of pride wrapped up in me knowing that I was right.
Right. Yeah, I was right there with you. When I say that's part of what drew me in, is when I finally got those answers to those questions that I'd always been asking, and finally I was like, oh, now all my life nobody's been able to answer these questions, and finally we've got the answers.
Got it. Yeah. So that pride that rose up in me whenever he said that, and I was like, nah, in my head, I was respectful to him whenever he said that, but in my head I was like, nah, bro, you're wrong about this one. You missed the Lord on this one, fella, because I know I'm good. I ain't riding off no one's coattails. I know what I believe and all this. And then, but man, looking back on that, because this was maybe a year or so before, it wasn't a really long period of time before, like, after he said that, before I started having doubts and started that process of deconstruction. It was kind of like, and I didn't even realize it until like maybe 6 months ago. I remembered this story, and I felt like Holy Spirit brought it back to my remembrance. It's kind of like a way of being like, hey man, yeah, I tried to warn you. This was happening. Like, I felt like that was like God was trying to tell me, like, hey man, like, buckle up, little buddy. Things are about to get real. You know, you're gonna go through something, and you're gonna have to figure some of this stuff out for yourself. You're gonna have to figure out what you really believe. Right. You know. So I guess like you mentioned, you had your story of kind of like the thing that sent you down that like really started things. Right.
The Bible and hell.
Yeah. Well, then that's the other thing in our church that was a big thing. The inerrancy, infallibility, exactly, of Scripture is a huge thing.
Which that was actually something that I had written down in my notes and totally forgot to mention here. But that was part of like the way that it wasn't just the teaching of the church that we were attending at the time, but from my baby upwards, I was always taught that you had to believe every single word in the Bible was literally true, or you couldn't believe any of it. Yeah. And so once I started hitting like those points of like, I don't know, some of this stuff isn't adding up. Like, how am I supposed to believe every single bit of it's literally true if there's two different places talking about the same story and they say two different things like that? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. But then the only alternative I had was just, I guess I can't believe any of this anymore. Like, because that's what I was taught in church. Like,
yeah. Yeah. And so that was a thing. The inerrancy of Scripture, hell, and the rapture. Those were my three major things. But what sent me down, because I didn't really ever question any of those things. Right. What sent me down this path of kind of questioning things is because I had a conversation with a guy at work who was an atheist, and he was someone who, unlike myself, I've already admitted that I didn't study or even really think things through for myself. You know, I took what I was handed and ran with it and held on to it so tightly, like no one could convince me otherwise, right? until they did.
Right.
I had a conversation with an atheist guy at work, and I was trying to, I was trying to witness to him, right? And the problem was this guy had really thought through his positions, and he knew more about the things in the Bible than I did.
Right.
And he knew what he believed, and he knew why he believed it. Whereas I knew what I said I believed, but didn't know why.
Right.
So, but even all that being said, everything that he said to me, because like I said, some of the teachings that we had from Christ's gospel, they really did provide answers for a lot of those big questions that atheists have.
Right.
Things that had to do with the problem of evil, and things like how do you reconcile evolution?
Yeah.
Things like that. So he was hitting me with these, what would probably typically be hard questions for Christians. And I was like, bam, bam, bam. What else you got?
Right.
And so I was holding my own in the debate, argument, whatever. But he asked me one question, and it didn't seem like it was a big deal at the time, but it just nagged at me kind of in the background of my mind until I really faced it.
Yeah.
And it was, he said, how do you know that what you believe is true, and not that you don't just believe it because that's what you've been told your entire life?
Right.
And the reason I couldn't let it go is because he was 100% correct. I didn't know.
Right.
In the moment, I was like, well, I know that I know that I know. That's the thing you're supposed to say, right?
Yeah.
As a good Christian, you're supposed to say, I know that I know. And one thing that I will say that I'm very grateful for with my Pentecostal background is I had real experiences.
Right.
And that's what I told this guy, and that was true. I'd had these real experiences with feeling the presence of God, and there being something tangible associated with that, that feeling.
Right.
That, like I said, the worship services is very emotionally driven.
Yeah.
So you had these experiences where you really felt something.
And I don't want to derail your story, but good. If I don't say it now, I'll forget totally what I was going to say.
You're cool. Go ahead.
But it's, I just think it's interesting because I feel like a lot of times, though, in church, you're taught to not trust your feelings. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You can't rely on what you think, or what you feel. You can't trust yourself. But then at the same time, so much of it is based on tangible, actual experiences that you feel, right? In your example here, that's one of the things that was keeping you held on was your actual tangible experiences. But on one hand, that's what kept you in, and that's a great thing. And on the other hand, you're also taught in church, you can't really trust the things that you're feeling. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but that really was. It was the only, that was, other than me just saying, I know that I know, that was the only thing that I was able to provide him at that moment was I know because I've had these experiences with God, and I felt the love of God. And this, like I said, again, having these emotional responses as feelings associated with it. And that's the only thing that kept me from going full atheist through my entire deconstruction was that just knowing that whatever I felt in those moments where I felt the love of God and I felt the presence of, and I felt Spirit moving, whatever that was, even if it was some sort of delusion, I think I'd rather live in that delusion than reality.
Right.
Because it feels so real.
Right.
So that's the only thing that kept me from going full atheist at that point. But that was the question. And when I really started thinking about it, thinking it all the way through, and that took me a while. It really did. I started having the questions, but then I really took a lot of time to really actually start thinking about it. Because the more I thought about it, the more scared I got.
Right.
That I was Because the questions lead to more questions, which lead to more questions.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's like if you really, at least my experience with it was like once you allow that first pebble to fall, then that just opens up 2 more questions, and then 2 more pebbles fall, that opens up 4 more questions, and then before you know it, like you're standing on a rubble pile. So
and there's. The only way you avoid that is to literally just to turn your brain off and not think about it.
Right.
Which I was able to do for a little bit, if I'm being honest.
Well, and what's funny, I was listening to your story and it brought like these thoughts to my mind about how like there's certain ingredients that I feel like that were fed through church culture that almost inevitably either leads to one path or another. Because, a lot about it's number one, it's a lot based on certainty, a lot, especially like, our experience is a lot about being certain, right theology, like we're the ones that have it right, so we believe the right thing.
Yeah.
But then there's also the fear, which is like the fear of hell or the fear of missing the rapture or fear. So like you can't really question what you've been taught because of the fear that's holding you in. And so it's just like this volatile mix of elements that like they're holding you together for now, but all it's going to take is one little thing and it's going to explode and make this huge mess. You know what I'm saying? Like, that, at least that's kind of like when I was listening to your story, that was sort of what stood out to me is like, because you said you were so certain without studying, but I feel like that was kind of by design because like that keeps you safe, because if you study too much, you start to question things, then that's scary because of the hell and the rapture and the all these terrible things. See, I definitely see what you're saying. I do feel like maybe because that was something that like our church wasn't the type of church that was like don't study, right?
It was, they definitely were like...
Absolutely.
Because I think that that's a thing. I think that there probably really are churches out there that are like, don't think too hard about this stuff. Don't study too hard because you'll study or think your way out of it.
For sure.
I think that is a thing, but that wasn't a thing for our church necessarily.
Right.
That was one of the things that always kept me coming back to the altar about missing the rapture was I wasn't praying and studying like I needed to.
Right. And like I said, that's one of the things that drew me into that church was because that was my personality and they matched up with it, right? Like, so it was perfect. It was a perfect mix.
But the certainty thing that you said, that for sure hits home because that is what really kept me in a place of deconstruction as long as it did, because I was so certain that what I grew up with was right, that if it wasn't, then God's not real at all, man.
Right.
Or at least I don't think he is. Like, I didn't even study any other Christian denominations or other ways that Christians have believed. I didn't even look into any of that stuff for years because I was so certain.
Right.
Which isn't faith, by the way.
Exactly. It's kind of the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you're certain of something, then there's no need for faith.
Right.
Yeah. Faith is the substance of things hoped for.
Yeah, you don't have to hope for something that you know exists.
Exactly. So, yeah. But that question, all those things that you just said were kind of wrapped up in that one question the guy asked me.
Right.
Because it confronted my certainty, and it also confronted this conception of hell, because I, like you said, being certain that we're the ones that have it right and everyone else is wrong. Every other religion is wrong. And so if I just put myself in someone else's shoes, like after he asked me that question and I started thinking about it later on, I asked myself the question, like, what if I had grown up somewhere else in the world and I was raised in a different religion? I would have thought that those people are going to hell because they're not Christian, right?
Which, by the way, is more people. If that's the way that's true, then more people that walk this earth is in hell than by far, right? Because there's more people alive or that have existed that weren't Christian than were.
Yeah, if you're talking about the history of all of
mankind.
Yeah. hell's chock full of folks. So yeah, I mean, actually asking myself that question and like imagining me, but growing up in a family that was a different religion.
Yeah.
Like, because I'm Christian, but I grew up, my parents were Christian, my grandparents are Christian. Every single person in my family, all of my friends are Christian.
Right.
I was forced to go to church as a child. Like,
and I mean, I was actually thinking about this when I was out for a run the other day, but like, so this community that we live in is small, very country, rural, Western Kentucky. I was trying to think, I don't think there is any sort of place of worship in our county that's not a Christian place of worship. I could be wrong, but off the top of my head, I couldn't think of a single one. And I was like, like that kind of hits to what you're saying about like, it's not just our family, but like there's literally no other religion here.
yeah.
I mean, we don't live that far away. Like, you can go, like, I know that there's a mosque in Bowling Green. There may be one in Owensboro, I don't know. But, like, it's not too far away. But I do know that there are places, that's 20, 30 minutes away. That's not too far. But, like, literally the town and the community, the county that we live in, I don't think there is any place of worship that's not Christian, some form of Christian. Whether it be, we have every swath of Christian that you could think of. We've got Catholic, Baptist, Methodist, Church of Christ, Jehovah's Witness, like, whatever any flavor that you want, we've got it.
Yeah.
But, that just kind of hits to the point that you're making of like, man, it's not just your family. There's literally no other option.
Right. So what if I'd grown up somewhere like the Middle East or like some other area of the world where I had that same exact situation, only the religion, the dominant religion where I grew up was not Christianity.
Right.
I believed that person was going to hell. I believed that version of me, because again, I'm trying to put myself in someone else's shoes. That version of me is going to spend eternity in hell.
Right.
And
doesn't sit right.
It didn't sit right. It's not, because that's I mean, I'm trying to be careful. That's what I say. I'm just gonna say it as plainly as I can. That's not just.
Yeah, that's the way that I was thinking it in my head. It doesn't seem just to me.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, and then we'll get into this, I'm sure, in future episodes, but like, we're just guys, we're just people, like, so are we even in a position to say what's just and what's not?
Right.
That's obviously a question that's probably even going through some people's minds as they're hearing me say that.
Right.
But I'm just being honest about where I'm at with it. That does not sit right with me. That does not seem just. It does not seem fair. And it doesn't seem like what a good dad would do.
Right. That's why I tried to word it the way I did, is that it doesn't seem just to me.
Yeah.
Because, like, that's not me saying I totally have the authority to say what is and isn't just.
Right.
All I'm saying is that from my perspective and what I know and my finite, fallible brain, it does not seem just to me.
Right. For sure. So yeah, that was the thing that got the ball rolling. And like I said, I thought about it a little bit, and it kind of bummed me out, so I stopped thinking about it.
Right.
And then every time I would think about it, it would bring up more questions, and I was like, no, you can't do this. You can't go that way.
Right.
So I would like try to stop thinking about it and just ignore it.
Right.
Until I couldn't anymore.
See, I distinctly also remember a time like where I was kind of in the midst of this, this transitional period, I guess, or deconstruction-ish period. And I hesitate to use that language because I think deconstruction and reconstruction is sort of a continual process that I don't know if you ever actually finish. But
yeah.
And when I was really in the thick of it, I specifically remember like going through a low point where I was like, I don't know what's what anymore. I don't know what's up from down. I don't know what's right from left. Like, I'm just so confused right now. And I was like, no, I'm not going to be like, I'm going to get back into the Word. Like, I'm going to start studying. And I can't remember if it was around Easter or if it was around Christmas. I want to say Christmas. But it was one of those where I was like, I'm going to read the Christmas story, you know, or I'm just going to read the resurrection story. Like I said, I can't remember which one it was, but I'm just going to like read it and like really immerse myself into the narrative of this season and like really get into the spirit of the season, you know, that we're in here. And like, this is going to rejuvenate my soul and like going to bring me back into it. Yeah. And there were just so many problems that I was just like, this is making it so much worse. But like, yeah, man, it's, I know what you mean as far as like trying to be in that, like, can't question it, or like you start to like draw yourself in, you're like pushing it away. Like, no, I can't. Like, I feel myself slipping away and I'm going to push through, or I'm going to try to this to like stop me from sliding down this slippery slope, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, that was an experience that I had for sure too, because I'm ashamed to say that for the first however many years of my life, like well into my adult years, I didn't really study the Bible very much.
Right.
I started actually reading it after this, and when I did, I was confronted with things like what you're talking about, where I was like, man, like, especially one thing that really bothered me was going back and reading, because again, the whole thing is right, and everything that's said in it is exactly what God said. Right. This isn't a dude. This is God. Right. This is the Word of God, the words of God. Right. You know. So whenever you read, I remember specifically having this guy at work, a different guy who was also an atheist, asked me a question about some of the laws of Moses that were written about, like, specifically there's he was like, well, your Bible says it's okay to rape women, but you just have to pay her father like 30 pieces of silver or something like that. Right. And so like little things like that, I would like go back and I would read and I would be like, that does kind of sound right. A little like did God say that?
Which I think this would be a great time to self-promote and say that if anything that we're saying about the Bible, whether you love it or hate it, whether you're like, I can't believe they're saying that, guess what? We're going to tackle how we look at the Bible and interpret the Bible and view the Bible and use the Bible in a future episode. So, I mean, we're kind of hitting around that a little bit as it relates to our story, but we're not really delving into like where we're at now with it, or where we came through this experience yet. You know, like I said, we're going to do our reconstruction in the next episode. So, if anything that we're saying about the Bible right now has you, whether you're mad about it or curious about it, keep tuning in, because you'll get some more information.
Yeah, and I don't say any of that to be offensive. I know it's hard to, because of where we've come from, where we were to where we are now. It's hard to kind of to not speak in a certain way that some people that haven't been through that process, it might make people uncomfortable to hear the way that we're talking about the scriptures. But
to those people, it might ease them a little bit to know that we both still read the Bible daily,
more than I ever have.
Right. So so we didn't, if it eases your heart, we didn't throw it away. We still read it every day.
I would argue that I have more respect and appreciation for the scriptures today than I ever have in my entire life.
I would say the same thing. But again, we'll get into the depths of that in a future episode.
Yeah. But I mean, anyone who's ever read the Bible, I don't think I'm saying anything too controversial to say that if you're reading it, you're seeing some things in it that you're like, that's a little odd. Yeah. Like, everyone has questions when they read it.
Right.
You know, so I don't think I'm saying anything too weird there.
No. I don't think so either. I mean, I guess as far as deconstructing goes, you know, that's sort of, for me, really the high points were the Bible and the troubles that I was having with that, and hell. And I mean, it just sort of was a kind of a slide into, from there, really, what didn't really consist of any more than that. It's just trying to find how you fit. You know, I guess that's the next thing that I would want to kind of talk about in the topic of deconstruction, is how I guess kind of how lonely it is, right? Because what that led for me, like as we were talking about earlier, where, you know, a big part of a lot of Christian denominations, and I would argue the one that we, you know, we're in, is certainty. And so if you start thinking or asking questions that go against that certainty, you almost don't feel safe to ask those out loud because you don't want to be ostracized or judged or, you know what I'm saying? And so, like, what that for me at least, and this is, you know, so I'm telling my story, that's what happened to me, is I started having these questions, and I don't, you know, at the risk of sounding arrogant, like, I was studying this stuff more than most were, you know, like, so it was hard for me to get any, like, solid answers, and at the same time, I was just afraid to ask the questions because I don't, again, with our small community that we live in, like, the only friends that we have are church friends. I don't have friends outside of church. So, like, if I lose my church friends, I have no friends. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so, but I also, I'm the kind of person that can't lie to myself. Like, I'm true to myself. And I always have been. And so I also can't pretend. I can't fake it. Yeah. So what that looks like for me is it looked like still attending church, but not participating in church. Yeah. And then I don't know if, you know, I'm sure some of our listeners have that same experience. What that leads to is just a really lonely, dark space to where, you know, I would say that I've always studied. I've always been a big listener into podcasts, Christian podcasts. I was still attending church, but I was just there. Like, I wasn't really paying attention. I wasn't listening. I was there on Sunday mornings only. I didn't go to Sunday school. I didn't go to Wednesday churches or Sunday night churches, and didn't care to. Had no desire to, because what my vision of who God was and my understanding of who God was didn't match the God that was, you know, that I felt like was being talked about. But also I didn't feel safe enough to breach that issue with anybody. So I don't know, that probably sounds like a bunch of rambling, but the point is, it just led me into a lonely spot to where I felt like I had nobody, like, to talk to about these things, which is I'm sure it's not true. I want to say that, like, because I'm sure that the people listening to this is going to be people that we know and people that attended that church with us or still do, and what I'm saying is not necessarily reality. What I'm saying is my perception of what reality was.
Right, because I'm sure that that door was open.
Exactly. Yeah.
It just didn't feel like it.
Right.
Because I had the same experience. You know, once I started down that rabbit hole of asking those tough questions, I was like, man, like, and just me, not really. This is just my personality. I guess I just always kind of have this, like, feeling like I'm alone in what I'm thinking, like, no one, like, I'm weird, and no one else is thinking this. So, like, I just assumed that people would look at me crazy if I had said any of this.
But I think church in general, and not just, like, our church that we're specifically talking about, our experience, but just the idea of church sort of is that, like, because it's sort of the idea is a group of people coming together in one accord, right? So like, if you're striking a different chord, you're not in one accord. So you're the weird one, you know?
Well, ironically, during that time, whenever you said you were coming but not really participating, me and my wife were actually picked up in the participation in the church, which put me in an awkward position. Right. Because of where I was internally, you know, because I was the same boat as you. I felt this sense of, like, being alone, and also this sense of not feeling like I could tell anyone about it. And me and you kind of walked through it together, to a certain extent. But outside of that, I never told anyone. Like, I even dealt with this for years before I even told my wife, which I regret that a lot now. Right. So it is a very lonely thing, and but while I was dealing with all this inside, we had a church split, so we lost members that were, like, we lost youth leaders and Sunday school teachers and things like that, and we ended up having to fill some of those positions, and that put me in an extra awkward position. Like I remember teaching a Sunday school lesson to our youth group whenever we were filling in, and I taught about like how to deal with your finances. Like I was just trying anything that I was trying to think of anything that was valuable to teach these kids that had nothing to do with the Bible.
Right.
Because I was like, I don't want to lie and I can't be honest. Right.
Right.
Got to keep it to myself.
Right.
So I
which is why you were even having to teach that class, because I had to step away from it because I was in that same boat.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I definitely know what you're talking about, though. I think anyone that's been through a deconstruction will tell you that. Anyone who hasn't been through a deconstruction I don't know that they understand that what you're really dealing with emotionally, like internally.
Which is probably why you have pastors out there calling it sexy.
Yeah. Oh, Maddie Chandler.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So you brought up a good point. And
it's
I think
not sexy.
Yeah, not a lot. Not
maybe that might be the worst possible word anyone has ever used to describe deconstruction.
So what you were saying a while ago, I thought brought something to my mind that's probably good for us to talk about in the deconstruction episode. Is you said that you regretted not talking, to your spouse about this.
Yeah.
So are there any other regrets that you have about deconstructing?
Yes. I would say that I regret not trusting my experiences more. I also regret not looking for other ways to stay Christian.
Right.
Because I spent years in a place of just picking apart everything that I grew up with that was handed to me,
right?
And just assuming that's what it was, and if it wasn't that, it was nothing,
right.
Instead of actually looking at like, well, what do Catholics believe?
Yeah. So that was actually something that I did, and that's that wasn't a regret. And I planned on saving this for I'll get much more into it in the next episode on my reconstruction story. But that was that was not a regret for me, is because I actually did immediately, just like I got to this dark spot, and then it was like, this isn't good. There's got to be something better. So then I'm starting like, well, what about this type of Christianity? But then for me, it expanded it out to, I started studying other things too. Like I've spent a lot of time reading Buddhist literature and, started reading some stuff from like Hindu teachers. And, I'm a big fan of like the Norse myths, so I've read, some of that stuff for some of the Eddas. And so that, like I've really did go through and try on all the shoes and see which one fit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I looked into stuff a little bit, but not as much as I really should have.
Yeah.
I did a little bit of like trying to educate myself on some of the other things you said, like Buddhism and Rastafari.
Oh yeah.
And some other religions and things like that, but not enough. Like that is, and I say regret, but also like I don't know that I would trade my path for anything.
Right. Yeah, that's keeping in mind that I agree that I don't know that I would trade my path either, because I feel like I've come, my point now is much healthier. So I'm appreciative of the path I took. Yeah. I guess if I had to say like what kind of regrets I had through the process, then the main thing for me is just not feeling like not trusting anyone, basically, like not speaking up more and just feeling so alone and shutting down. Basically, that was my response to the whole thing, was just like kind of shelling myself in, like a turtle pulling its head in its shell. Like, I'm here, but don't talk to me. And so that, I guess that to me, that's my biggest regret. I tried to deal with it by myself. Like I said, I was studying all these different paths, reading books. I'm a big reader, listening to all these different kind of podcasts. But I was trying to figure all that out by myself. Yeah. So that to me, I guess, is the one big regret that I have through it.
Yeah.
What about, do you think that deconstruction is something that everybody should go through?
You know, I actually think about this. I wouldn't know. Maybe not that I think about it a lot, but I think about it somewhat regularly.
Yeah.
Because I know how transformative it was for me and how important it was for me and how much I wouldn't trade it for anything. As far as like, this is one of those instances where the grass really is greener on the other side.
Right.
It was for me, for sure. That was
Right.
my experience. And the thing is, every single person that I have ever heard speaking about their own process of deconstruction would say the exact same thing.
Right.
That it really is, there's something better on the other side of it. And so that part of me does think like, man, like maybe if you haven't been through that, maybe you should. But then I think that there's also different levels of it. There's like, I don't know that everyone has to throw everything out like I did.
Right.
You know, because there are people that talk about deconstruction in way better ways now that these resources weren't there as far as I know whenever I was going through it. But now there's tons of books and podcasts and things about it, YouTube videos talking about it. And there's like Brad Jerzyk has this analogy for it where he talks about, it's actually a story a personal story he has where he, there was a young woman, I can't remember how he was related to her, but there was some young woman that was getting married and she ordered this really old vintage dress off of like eBay or something like that. And, it had some stains in it. So she took it to this guy. I can't think of the guy's name. He's a dry cleaner. And he said he doesn't remove the stain. He reveals the beauty underneath.
Right.
And like, so that's an analogy. And then there's, Brian Zahn talks about like art restoration, like an art piece that has things that need to be restored to restore the beauty of the picture, you know.
Right.
That was not my experience. Mine was, and I wish that is actually, since we're talking about regrets, I kind of feel like maybe that would have been a better path. Like if I'd known, maybe that would have been a better way to go about it.
Right.
Is to kind of meticulously restore, like with care. Because whenever you're restoring a piece of art, there's care and time involved. Mine was more like a wrecking ball coming in and destroying a house, right?
Exactly.
It was taking a sledgehammer to stuff, and it was demo.
But go to the point that we've been making is that like when you're trying to do it on your own, you don't know any better.
Yeah.
You know? So
yeah.
I mean, I guess for me to answer that question, do I think everybody should go through it? I go back and forth on it a lot because I agree 100% with what you said. Like for me, it was the right call. Like it was the best option. It led me to a much healthier place. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't know any better way to put it other than like the place that I'm at now in my life is much healthier, my spiritual life. Yeah. For me, it was a fantastic thing. And I think it could have that potential for everybody. Yeah. But then I get on TikTok or whatever, and I see these videos and I see people who have deconstructed, and it led them. Sometimes I guess it would they would probably not say it led them down a darker path. Mm-hmm. And some people, I don't know that it led them down a darker path, but maybe it didn't lead them. They never reconstructed, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. They deconstructed without reconstructing. Yeah. And I don't, depending on how you look at it, like should everybody deconstruct or not? Well, I don't know. Like depends on, do you think they should reconstruct? Because a good portion of the people that do aren't going to reconstruct. So... That's definitely a fear. That's definitely a possibility, right? Which I struggled with my words to put that because, and I think that this is probably something that we'll hit on again in other episodes. Is that a bad thing or not? I don't know. Like we can have that discussion. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I was trying to like phrase it in a way that was respectful to those people. Because I don't necessarily know that I would say it's a bad thing. Most of the ones that I see, at least on TikTok, they would argue that it was for their betterment. So you know.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, like I said, that's we're probably pushing up on our time, aren't we?
Yeah. I'd say we're getting pretty close.
Yeah. So, like I said, that's something I think that we could cover in future episodes. So, since we're coming up to the end here, you know, what do you have any final thoughts that anything that we should leave in here for deconstruction?
Nothing's coming to mind. Nothing.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, really.
No, I think that we covered it pretty well.
I mean, obviously, you could get into the details of like specifically our thought process through it, like how we the actual individual things that we deconstructed.
Right.
You know,
which I think I think that maybe those are let's not.
That would take forever.
Let's not attack it all at one time.
Yeah.
Like those can each be separate episodes, right?
Yeah.
We take a topic and break it down.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and like we said in our intro, like we're figuring things out. I mean, we've got new mics here, so we're testing out new equipment. We're testing out new formats. Maybe we'll add some segments in here or there, but like. We felt like it was a good spot just to start from the beginning for us. And so next week or next, I don't even want to lock us into weekly episodes, but the next episode, maybe we'll talk about our reconstruction, because like I said, we're both still members and attending and participants in church. We both still study. And so we both went through a period of reconstruction after we deconstructed.
Yeah.
So, I think that we'll talk about that next time.
Yeah, I guess maybe the one more thing that I would say, just to kind of like a message maybe to leave people with that's listening.
Yeah.
If you're listening and you are going through that process of deconstruction, if you're having doubts and questions, just know that you're not alone. That there are people like me and Sal that have been through that process, and you don't have to abandon your faith. You may have to abandon specific aspects of what you previously believed, but you don't have to abandon Jesus.
Right.
Please don't abandon Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, and like you had pointed out, like when we were going through it, there wasn't a whole lot of resources, if any. Like, I mean, I guess it's not fair to say any, because I was already starting to read some of the more, like Rachel Held Evans and Brian Zahn and Brad Jersey. And like, these people existed, and I was already starting to read some of this stuff. That was... So resources existed, but not to the extent that they do now. So if you are someone like, that like what Sean had said, someone who's going through that, they're like, just look, like there's resources out there. So,
yep. Well,
all right, man, we'll wrap it up then. Join us again in our next episode. We're going to talk about reconstruction, and we'll see you then.
See you guys.